A judge is not supposed to stand for anyone. That is the whole point of the robe. He sits, you rise. That is how the room works. But on a gray Tuesday in November, in a county courtroom that smelled like radiator heat and old paper, my wife of 31 years pointed her chin at me and said it loud enough for the back row. Your Honor, he's just a worthless veteran. He has nothing left to take. Her lawyer smiled at his legal pad. A couple of people in the gallery looked at their shoes. I kept my hands folded on the table in front of me and said nothing. I had gotten good at nothing. Then the judge looked at me, not a glance. A long look, the kind a man gives a road he used to live on. His mouth opened a little. His hand came off the bench. And Judge Ellery Dunbar, 22nd Judicial Circuit, rose to his feet. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm Hank Overby, 69 years old, retired, and until last fall I was a married man. I live in Corbin, Kentucky, in a brick house on Cordell Street with a porch that faces west. For 30 years I ran Overby Water and Heat. Water heaters mostly, boilers when somebody still had one. If you took a hot shower in this county between 1994 and 2021, there's a fair chance you owe me a nod. It is not glamorous work. It is honest work. You learn a house from the inside out. You learn that the thing everybody ignores in the basement is the thing keeping them comfortable upstairs. I have thought about that a lot this past year. The town sees what it sees. A green pickup with a toolbox I never emptied. A booth at the Dixie Diner on Thursday mornings. A man who waves with 2 fingers off the wheel. That's all they see. I prefer it that way. There is a shoebox on the top shelf of my closet. Inside it are 2 ribbons, a medal with an anchor on it, and a photograph of 8 young men on a pier. I have not shown that box to 5 people in 40 years. And there is a brass lighter I have carried since 1983. It doesn't work anymore. That was never the point. It belonged to a 20-year-old from Dayton, Ohio, named Tommy Greer, and he never got to be 21, and that is all I am going to say about that for now. I met Sandra in 1993 at the dental office on Main. She had a laugh you could hear from the parking lot, and she used it like sunlight. I was 36 and quiet, and she said my hands looked like they could fix anything. We married in June of 1995. Our daughter Bree came along 2 years later, and for a long stretch of years, I believed I was the luckiest slow-talking man in Kentucky. Those were good years, and I want to be fair to them. Sandra ran the front of my life like a lighted window. She kept the books for the shop before we could afford Doris. She sat up with me the winter the business nearly broke us, doing arithmetic at the kitchen table in her bathrobe, and never once made me feel small about the numbers. I want you to know she was not always the woman from the courtroom. Nobody starts out as the person they become. Bree grew up in the shop on Saturdays. She'd hand me fittings and mispronounce them on purpose to make me laugh. She'd fall asleep on the bench seat of the truck on the drive home, and I would take the long way, easing over the railroad tracks so she wouldn't wake. A man doesn't know he's living the best part while it's happening. That's the meanest trick time plays. And every October 23rd, all those years, I went to the flagpole at the Memorial Park. Sandra came with me the first few times, early on. She'd stand beside me with her arm through mine and not ask questions, and I loved her for that in a way I never found words for. I should have found the words. I know that now. She used to ask about the lighter. She'd turn it over in her fingers at the kitchen table and ask, and I'd say, in old friends, and she would put it down gently, like it was warm. Somewhere along the way, she stopped asking. The small cuts started years before the papers did. I can't give you the day it turned. Nobody can. A marriage doesn't break like a pipe. It corrodes like one. Quiet, from the inside, at the joints. I remember standing in my own kitchen with a tray of deviled eggs while her book club laughed in the next room. One of the ladies asked what I did before I retired, and Sandra answered for me, through the doorway, in that bright hostess voice. He fixes water heaters. Somebody has to. Laughter. The polite kind. The kind with a little grit in it. I set the tray down and went back to the garage. No shouting, no scene, no door slammed. Just a man and a workbench and a radio turned up 1 notch too loud. There was Thanksgiving, year before last. I was telling Milo, my grandson, about the raccoon that got into the shop and set off 3 alarms trying to steal my sandwich. Good story. True, mostly. Halfway through, Sandra's voice came across the table like a ruler across knuckles. Hank, nobody needs the long version. Milo looked at me. 5 years old, and he looked at me to see what a man does. I finished the story in one sentence, and everybody laughed anyway. Milo hardest of all. But I saw Bree watching her mother. I saw the wondering start in her, quiet as frost. There was the night at the country club 2 winters ago. Somebody's retirement party. She had a glass of white wine in her hand and her arm through mine, and she introduced me to a table of strangers as my starter husband. She said it with a wink. The table roared. I smiled because that is what you do, and I spent the next hour learning the pattern of the carpet. For our 30th anniversary, I built her a jewelry chest. Cedar, dovetailed corners, brass hinges I ordered special from Louisville. 3 months of evenings. I rubbed the finish out with wax until it glowed like a violin. She opened it on the kitchen table, and her face did a thing I still see when I close my eyes. A little fall, a recovery, a smile stretched over disappointment like a slipcover. 2 days later, I found it in the hallway with the return pile, the pile with the toaster that didn't match and the sweater that didn't fit. "It's a jewelry box, Hank," she said when I asked. "Women my age buy jewelry, not boxes." I carried it to the garage and set it on the workbench. It's still there. It holds sandpaper now. Best made thing in the county, holding sandpaper. That spring she redecorated the living room. New sofa, new drapes, a rug the color of oatmeal that showed every boot print I ever made. My recliner, the brown one, the one shaped like 30 years of my back, went to the curb on a Wednesday while I was at the hardware store. In its place stood a stiff gray chair no human being has ever fallen asleep in. "It's called an accent chair," she said. I asked what it was accenting. She didn't answer. I sat in it exactly once, the day it arrived, the way you shake hands with a man you already know you won't like. Then came Roy Stahl. He showed up in the spring of 2024 at the pickleball club Sandra had joined. Retirement advisor, he called himself. Tanned in March, which in Kentucky is a statement. He wore loafers with no socks and a watch he checked when other people talked. And my wife's vocabulary changed. She started saying liquidity at dinner. She started saying our risk profile. One night she looked across the table at me, at a man who had paid off a house and a business and raised a daughter without borrowing a nickel from anybody, and she said, "Roy thinks we're sitting on dead money." "Roy thinks," I said. "Somebody has to," she said. That was her phrase that year. Somebody has to. Roy came to dinner at my house twice that summer. He called the house a solid little asset. He called Corbin charming, honestly. He asked what I did with my time, the way you'd ask a child about a sandbox, and when I said I kept busy, he smiled at Sandra like I'd proved a point the two of them had already agreed on. I refilled his tea. My mother did not raise a man who runs a guest dry, whatever the guest may be. But out in the garage that night, I stood a long while at the workbench, not building anything, just standing with my hands flat on the cedar chest, the way you'd steady yourself on a rail. Every October, I go quiet for a stretch. I always have. I drive out to the Memorial Park on the 23rd, and I stand a while at the flagpole, and I come home tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. 31 years, she watched me do it. She called it the sulk, as in, "Don't mind Hank, he's doing his October sulk." I let it go. I let all of it go. I want to be honest with you about that because it matters later. Restraint had become my native language. I mistook it for peace. Bree called it something different. She called it disappearing. "Dad," she said once on the porch, "you go somewhere behind your own eyes and you don't come back for days." I told her I was fine. Fathers say that. It is the family motto of men my age. Fine. Then, on a Thursday morning in September of last year, at my booth at the Dixie Diner, between the coffee and the eggs, a polite young man in a windbreaker asked if I was Henry Overby and laid a manila envelope on the table. Petition for dissolution of marriage. No shouting, no warning. No ring left on the counter. Just paper in front of the morning regulars with my fork still in my hand. I read the first page twice. Then I folded it back into the envelope, finished my coffee, because a man is allowed one act of pure stubbornness per day, and I tipped Marlene like always. The papers asked for the house. The truth came to me on paper, too. Paper has a way of finding its own kind. When I sold the shop in 2021, I kept the old P.O. box. Habit. 30 years of parts catalogs and warranty cards go to an address, and some part of you can't quite let the address die. I'd swing by every month or so and clear out the flyers. 2 weeks after I got served, I went to clear it, and in the back of the box, behind a gutter cleaning coupon, stood a neat little stack of envelopes from our bank. Money market statements. The joint account, the one holding the money from the sale of my shop. See, years back, when we opened that account, I listed the shop box as the mailing address, because in those days, everything I trusted went through that box. Then the world went paperless, and Sandra handled what she called the online things, and I signed where I was told, the way trusting husbands do. But banks are like old plumbers. Somewhere in the basement of their system, a pipe still ran to the original address. The paper never stopped coming. She never knew. You cannot delete an envelope. I sat in the truck in the post office lot and opened 14 months of statements in order. Oldest first, like a man reading his own x-rays. March of 2024. Transfer out, $4,600. April, the same. May, the same. 19 of them by the end of the stack, every month like a mortgage, all to an account number I had never seen, at a bank in Lexington we had never used. 19 months, $87,400, March of 2024. The month Roy Stahl started advising, I did the arithmetic twice with a pencil because I wanted to be wrong. The pencil didn't care what I wanted. Here is what I remember about that hour in the truck. I was not angry. Anger came later, in manageable sizes. What I felt first was cold, like a draft finding you in a house you thought you'd sealed. The benefit of the doubt is a pilot light, and I sat in a post office parking lot and felt mine go out. Paper does not raise its voice. It doesn't have to. I did not drive home and throw the statements on the kitchen table. I want you to understand how much of me wanted to. There is a version of that evening where I get loud and she gets tearful, and her lawyer later tells a judge about an unstable old veteran frightening his poor wife at dinner. Instead, I drove to the shop box's post office, made 2 copies of everything at the machine in the lobby, and put the originals in the toolbox in my truck bed, under the socket trays, where nothing in this world has ever been disturbed. Then I went home and asked what she wanted from the store. She wanted lemons and coffee filters. I remember because ordinary is what you hold on to. And 2 nights later, with Sandra at her sister's, I spread the copies across the kitchen table in rows, oldest to newest, and set my old shop ledger beside them. Habit again. 30 years of writing down every fitting and filter teaches your hand what your heart would rather skip. I matched each transfer against the calendar we kept on the refrigerator, the one in her handwriting. March, Roy, portfolio review. June, Roy, rebalancing. September, R. Lunch, Lexington. By midnight, the kitchen looked like an audit because it was one. I moved nothing. I put every page back in order, washed my 1 cup at the sink, and went to bed beside my wife of 31 years, and lay there in the dark like a man floating on top of his own life. Colleen Rusk had an office above the flower shop on Depot Street, 1 flight of stairs that announced you like a doorbell. She was 58, wore reading glasses on a chain, and had a handshake like a door latch. She'd handled the sale of my shop back in 2021. I laid the statements on her desk in 2 neat rows, and she read them the way I read a pressure gauge. No sighing, no eyebrows, just information becoming a plan. Does she know you have these? No, ma'am. Does anybody? You. She took her glasses off. Mr. Overby, I'm going to tell you the whole strategy right now, and you're not going to like how boring it is. Say nothing at home. Change nothing. Paper fights paper. We subpoena the bank, we let her file whatever affidavit she wants to file, and we let her walk into it. You just keep being a gentleman. That's it. That's it. The hardest thing I will ask you to do in this case is stay exactly who you are. That evening I sat at the VFW hall with Oscar Meeks, who is 74 and was Army, which he mentions the way other men mention a rash. Black coffee and white cups. I told him all of it, because a man needs one room where the whole truth can sit down. Oscar was quiet a while. Then he said, "You want to burn it all down. The club, the advisor, her." Some nights. And what would that cost you? Everything I've got left. He nodded at the lighter sitting on the table between us, the way it always sits when October's coming. You didn't carry that thing 40 years to become a man Tommy wouldn't recognize. He let that sit, then slid his cup aside. You know what I did when Verna's bills came and the VA lost my file 3 times running? You wrote letters. I wrote letters, 41 of them. Politest man in the county, 4 years straight, and I won. Nobody remembers an angry man's case, Hank. They remember a patient man's file. The hall smelled like burnt coffee and floor wax, the way it has since Ford was president. 2 tables over, a kid from the Gulf era was teaching an older fellow how to work his phone. Rooms like that keep a man honest about what loud ever bought anybody. Restraint is not weakness. Restraint is aim. My old gunnery sergeant used to say something like that, usually about ammunition, and it took me 4 decades to learn he was talking about everything else. I drove home. I carried the groceries in like any Tuesday. Sandra was on the phone in the sunroom, and her voice through the glass was bright, and I did not stand there wondering who was on the other end. I already knew, and knowing and saying nothing was the heaviest thing I have ever carried sober. Preparation looks boring from the outside. That is how you know it's working. We lived in the same house that fall like 2 guests at a hotel with 1 hallway. Polite, careful, separate grocery lists on 1 refrigerator, which is its own kind of funeral. We got good at the choreography. She took the early bathroom. I took the early kitchen. If her car was in the drive at lunch, I ate at the diner. We spoke in logistics. The gutter man comes Thursday. There's chili if you want it. One night in late September, the power went out in a storm, and for half an hour we sat in the same dark living room with 1 candle, and neither of us said a word. I remember thinking, this is the truest conversation we've had all year. She thought my calm meant surrender. Her lawyer had told her, I found out later, that I would fold inside a month. He had a saying she liked and repeated to her sister. He'll sign anything. He's been beaten his whole life. Beaten. Well, there are men who would have been insulted. I had been called worse by better. Colleen's subpoenas went out to the bank in Lexington quiet as seed corn. And in the 2nd week of October, Sandra's financial affidavit arrived, sworn and notarized, listing the marital savings at $9,000. $9,000. The shop I built for 30 years had gone into that account at $210,000. Colleen set the affidavit next to the statements on her desk, squared the corners, and looked at them a long moment, almost fond, the way a carpenter looks at a nail that is about to meet a hammer. She signed this under oath, she said, under penalty of perjury. What do we do? Nothing, she said. We do nothing, and in November, the paper introduces itself. Bree came over that same week, arms crossed, jaw set like mine. The town had begun to hum, the way towns do. Mom says her lawyer says you're hiding money. I looked at her a long second. Do you believe that? No, but I want to hear you say it. I have never hidden $1 from your mother in my life. She nodded, slow. Okay, then I'm not asking anything else till it's over. She was at my door the next Sunday anyway, with a casserole and no questions. Loyalty with boundaries. I don't know where she learned that. I'd like to think I do. On the 23rd of October, I drove to the Memorial Park like I have every year since Reagan was president. Gray sky, flag straight out in the wind, halyard clapping the pole like a slow clock. 42 years, and I still owed Tommy a conversation every October. I stood there with my hands in my jacket pockets, and I told him about it. All of it. The book club, the starter husband, the cedar chest full of sandpaper. 19 withdrawals shaped exactly like a man named Roy. Divorce papers between the coffee and the eggs. I'm not a man who hears voices, and the flagpole has never once answered me. But standing there, I got something like an answer anyway, the kind that comes up through your boots. Tommy Greer died at 20 with more dignity than most men bank in 80 years. And his lighter was in my pocket, and it was not going to sit in the pocket of a man who begged. A car pulled into the lot while I stood there. An older sedan, engine left running. I heard a door and then nothing, and when I finally turned, a woman about my age was standing at the low wall with a folded flag in a case, just holding it the way you hold a sleeping child. We nodded at each other across 30 yards of cold grass. Neither of us spoke. There is a whole language in this country made of nods like that, and it says everything the loud people think has to be shouted. I drove home the long way over the railroad tracks, easy. The night before the hearing, I pressed my one good suit, charcoal gray, bought for Bree's wedding. I set it on the closet door. I took the shoebox down off the shelf, and I took out nothing. I looked, and I put the lid back, and I put the box away. Some things you don't wear to court. You just need to know they're there. That last Thursday, Marlene slid my eggs across the counter and said, "You doing all right, Hank?" And the whole counter got quiet to hear the answer. "Never better," I said. 6 men went back to their coffee, relieved. A town runs on such small mercies. The lighter went in the pocket. The lighter goes where I go. The temporary orders hearing was set for a Tuesday in November, 9 in the morning, courtroom 2. Frost on the courthouse lawn. I got there early, because early is the only speed I have for hard things, and I sat in the truck and watched the maintenance man salt the steps, and I thought, there's a fellow keeping people upright who will never get thanked for it. Then I went in. Courtroom 2 heard its ordinary sorrows first. A landlord matter. A custody schedule. The law in the morning is a waiting room, and everybody in it holds their number in their coat. I sat with my hat on my knee and watched the frost let go of the high windows, and I did not rehearse. Colleen had forbidden it. Answer what's asked. Offer nothing. Gentlemen don't audition. Sandra wore a new coat the color of cream and did not look at me. Vance Marchetti wore a suit that fit like ambition and looked at me plenty. He had the smile of a man who has read the file and likes his hand. Bree slipped into the second row behind me, on my side of the aisle, which cost her something with her mother, and I will remember it the rest of my life. The judge came in and we rose. Ellery Dunbar, said the nameplate. Silver hair, wire glasses, a face like a closed book. I didn't study him. Truth is, I was watching my own folded hands, which is where I keep my temper. Marchetti went to work, and he was good at his job, I'll give him that. The picture he painted had a frame and a price tag. An aging man, no income beyond a pension check, no contribution to speak of in the marriage's later years. It would be, he said, a hardship for his client to remain under one roof with the respondent. His client sought exclusive possession of the marital home, my home, the one with my mother's inheritance buried in its foundation and my name on its loan. He went on a while. He had numbers of his own, softer ones, arranged to catch the light. The respondent's pension, the respondent's age, the word respondent itself, over and over, until the man at this table stopped having a name at all. I have installed 1,000 water heaters, and I can tell you, this is how you sweat a joint. Low heat, steady, until the metal takes whatever shape you've decided on. I watched him work and felt almost professional about it. Almost. Colleen sat beside me and wrote one word on her legal pad, tilted so I could see it. Wait. The radiator ticked. Somewhere behind me, my daughter was holding her breath. I counted pipe sizes in my head, the way other men count to 10. Judges hear this music every day, and Dunbar's face gave nothing. Maybe that's why Sandra decided the room needed more. Maybe the coaching wore thin. Maybe 31 years of somebody has to came due all at once. Because when Marchetti paused, my wife stood halfway out of her chair and pointed her chin at me and said it. Loud, deliberate, like a woman spending a coin she'd saved. Your Honor, he's just a worthless veteran. He has nothing left to take. The courtroom did that thing rooms do. It held its breath. Marchetti smiled at his legal pad. I kept my hands folded, and I watched Judge Ellery Dunbar not move for 3 full seconds. Then he took off his glasses, slow, and he looked at me the way I told you at the start, like a road he used to live on. Sir, he said, not counselor, not respondent. Sir, would you state your full name for the record? I stood up because you stand for a judge. Henry Allen Overby, Your Honor, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps, retired. Quiet. Beirut, he said. It was not a question. Yes, sir. 23rd of October, 1983. The court reporter's hand stopped over her keys. Somewhere behind me a bench creaked, and Judge Ellery Dunbar, 22nd Judicial Circuit of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, stood up behind his bench, straight. He came to attention like a man stepping into an old uniform that still fit, and he raised his right hand to his temple, and he held a salute at a 69-year-old plumber in a wedding-bought suit. You could hear the radiator tick, nothing else. Marchetti found his voice first. Lawyers always do. Your Honor, with respect, whatever theatrics, the respondent is still a man of no means who... The judge lowered his hand and said 5 words. Get out of my courtroom. Not loud. That was the thing. He said it the way you'd read a serial number. Marchetti sat down instead, which the judge let stand because sitting was its own kind of leaving. Recess, Dunbar said. 15 minutes. When we came back on the record, he didn't look at Sandra, and he didn't look at me. He looked at some point in the middle of the room, where I suppose the truth stands, and he spoke carefully, for the transcript. On the 23rd of October, 1983, I was a second lieutenant in Beirut, Lebanon. The building I was quartered in came down in the early morning. I was 23 years old and pinned in the dark, and I had stopped calling out. He folded his glasses. The man seated at the respondent's table dug for 2 hours with his hands. He found me. He carried me 300 meters to the aid station. Then he went back into the rubble for others. I have carried his name for 43 years. I cannot hear this case, and I am recusing myself. It will be reassigned. He rose. We rose. At the door to chambers, he stopped and turned and said one thing more, to no one and to everyone. This court stands corrected on the phrase worthless veteran. Gone, door shut, and a hallway full of people who had somewhere urgent to look. Sandra's face, when I finally let myself see it, was the face from the kitchen table and the cedar chest. A little fall, a recovery that didn't come. Bree squeezed my shoulder from the row behind. Her hand was shaking. Mine weren't. I have wondered about that since. Colleen gathered her folders with great care, the way you do when a room needs a minute to remember how ordinary works. In the hallway, the clerk of court, a woman I've known since her father sold me pipe fittings, touched my sleeve and said nothing at all. 60 years in one county teaches you that the touch is the sentence. Judge Wanda Trask ran a quiet courtroom, and January is a good month for arithmetic. The final hearing was short on drama, the highest compliment the law can be paid. Colleen stood up with the bank's own records, subpoenaed and certified, and set them beside a sworn affidavit that said $9,000, and then she did the cruelest thing you can do to a lie. She read slowly, 19 transfers, $4,600 each, $87,400 into an account opened in March of 2024 in Sandra's name alone at a bank in Lexington. Statements mailed by grace of an old address nobody thought to check to a P.O. box rented by Overby Water and Heat since 1994. Marchetti objected less as the morning went on. By 11 he was mostly turning pages, a man watching his retainer outrun his case. I testified for 11 minutes. Colleen asked whether I had ever moved, hidden, or spent $1 of the marital accounts. No, ma'am. That was my testimony, entire. Marchetti looked at the statements, looked at me and said, nothing for this witness. Wisest thing he said all winter. The tracing came next, dry as toast and twice as necessary. The house on Cordell Street, purchased 1999, VA loan, borrower Henry A. Overby. Down payment, $40,000, my mother's inheritance, kept traceable in its own account all those years. Separate contribution, Colleen said, documented, unrebutted. And then it was over. The way paper ends things. No gavel bang, judges mostly just sign. The decree came in February. The $87,000 was credited against Sandra's share. The house stayed mine. The rest split fair, actually fair. I did not set out to leave the mother of my daughter with nothing, and I didn't. One more thing didn't happen, on purpose. Judge Trask at the last looked at the affidavit and then at Colleen and asked mildly whether the respondent wished the matter of the sworn statement referred to the county attorney. The room got interested in me again. Perjury is a felony. I will not pretend the thought had never kept me warm at the workbench. But standing there, what I saw was Bree, and a boy named Milo who calls me Pop, and a Christmas 20 years from now that would either have a broken woman missing from it or wouldn't. No, Your Honor, I said. The correction is enough. Sandra found me in the hallway after. The cream coat was gone. The coat she wore was one I remembered from years back. Up close, she looked tired in the specific way you look when a Roy Stahl is done with you. And the truth had come out about that too. Roy was advising a widow in Florida now. Most of the 87,000 had gone wherever loafers with no socks go. 31 years, she said. Her mascara was holding on by training alone. 31 years, and I didn't know about Beirut. You knew where I was every October, I said. You called it the sulk. She flinched like I'd shouted, though I hadn't raised my voice. Start to finish, I never did. It was the only thing that was ever fully mine to control. Hank, if I had known who you were. That's the part that breaks it, I said, gentle as I could and still be honest. You shouldn't have needed the salute. I held the door for her because my mother raised me and the Marine Corps finished the job, and we walked out of the courthouse into the cold, separately, for good. Winter passed slowly after the decree, and then all at once, the way winters do. Bree and Milo started coming Sundays. She'd cook in my kitchen, too much, on purpose, and Milo took over the garage. He is 5, and he believes sandpaper is a musical instrument, and there is a crooked birdhouse hanging off my porch, now that no self-respecting bird will enter and no power on this earth will make me take down. He found the cedar chest on the workbench one Sunday, ran his little hand over the finish and said, Pop, this is the smoothest thing in the world. Kids in paper, they just say what's true. Thursday breakfasts went from a booth for 1 to a booth for 2, then 3. Oscar first, then Ellery once the winter let go. The regulars adjusted their nods accordingly. In a small town, a booth is a bulletin. In March, Ellery Dunbar called me. Now that the case was closed and reassigned and done, there was no rule against 2 old men drinking coffee. He came out to the porch on a Saturday, no robe, just a cardigan, and 43 years of things we'd never said. We talked about that morning in pieces, the way you handle broken glass, a little at a time, wrapped in ordinary talk about grandkids and knees. At one point, he held his coffee with both hands and looked out at the yard. I stopped calling out, he said. You want to know the worst thing? I'd stopped. I'd done the math on the weight. I was never good at math, I said. He laughed until he had to set the cup down. Then he didn't laugh, and neither did I, and that was all right too. Some silences are the conversation. On Memorial Day, we stood at the flagpole together, the judge and the plumber, while the high school band played flat and sincere. Neither of us said Tommy's name out loud. We didn't need to. Some men attend a ceremony. Some men are one. In May, I drove north to Dayton, Ohio, with the brass lighter in the cup holder like a passenger. Nadine Greer is 68 now. She has Tommy's same square chin and his habit of laughing one beat before the joke lands. I sat at her kitchen table, and I put her brother's lighter in her hand, and I told her the parts of October 23rd that a sister should have, and none of the parts she shouldn't. 43 years I'd carried it, and I'd told myself it was for Tommy. Driving home with an empty cup holder, lighter than I'd been in decades, I finally understood it had been carrying me. Nadine walked me out to the truck. At the door, she pressed a photograph into my hand. Tommy at 19, laughing at something out of frame, holding that lighter up like a trophy. He'd have liked you old, she said. You two were only ever young together. I drove the first hour home with the window down, cold as it was. Sandra wrote me a letter that same month. Real paper, which I appreciated because at least the medium had learned something. She was living near her sister in Tennessee. She was sorry. She was more sorry than the letter could hold. And I believe that, and I want you to know I believe it. I read it twice on the porch. Then I wrote back 2 lines. I forgive you enough to want good things for you. Please don't write again. Forgiveness is a door. Some doors you close kindly and you keep them closed. Bree asked me once, careful, whether I hated her mother. I told her the truth. Hate is a pilot light too. Mine went out in a post office parking lot last fall, and I am not a man who relights what is better off cold. People ask, the few who know the whole of it, whether I miss her. And the honest answer is that I miss the woman from the dental office on Main, the one who asked about the lighter and set it down gently. I have missed that woman for longer than the divorce has existed. The papers just made it official. The evenings are quiet on Cordell Street now. The birdhouse hangs crooked. The chest on the workbench holds Milo's treasures these days, a buckeye, a bolt, a feather, which is to say it finally holds jewelry. The crooked birdhouse got a tenant in June, a house wren, an ounce and a half of pure opinion. No self-respecting bird, I'd said. Well, I have been wrong before about who moves in and who moves out. This July, Bree hung little white lights along the porch rail for Milo's birthday and left them up. I sit out there most evenings now with coffee I have no business drinking after 4, and the neighbors wave, 2 fingers off the wheel, and I wave back. Ellery says I ought to get a dog. Oscar says I ought to get a boat. Milo has voted, loudly, for both. We'll see. A man my age should keep an election or 2 undecided just to stay interesting. And the house is full of quiet, and for the first time in years, the quiet is mine. If you've ever been made small by someone who promised to love you, hear me out. Your worth was never up for their appraisal. A man's value isn't set by the loudest voice at his table. It is set by what he carries and how and for whom. If this story meant something to you tonight, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who is being underestimated at their own kitchen table. And tell me in the comments if life ever stood up and saluted you late. It matters more than you know. Thanks for spending this time with me. And remember, no matter your age, dignity over spite, peace over pride, and kindness always over control.